And therefore, Ms. Evans, this court finds you in contempt, a fine of $15,000. The words hung there, heavy, like humidity before a storm. $15,000. Just like that, pulled from the air. A number meant to sting, meant to silence. I didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't even blink right away. Just held his gaze. Judge Albright, leaning back slightly in his big chair. That practiced look of solemn authority. But his eyes, there was a flicker in his eyes. Triumph? No, not quite. Satisfaction, like swatting a fly that had been buzzing too close. Around me, the courtroom shifted. A collective intake of breath. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Low, startled sounds. Someone dropped a pen. It clattered loudly in the sudden quiet. My client, sitting beside me, stiffened. Her hand twitched on the table. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. Stay calm. Albright's gaze swept the room, taking in the reaction, maybe expecting fear, or at least submission. He found my eyes again, raised an eyebrow slightly. A silent question. Well, are you sufficiently put in your place? I just blinked, slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his pronouncement settle, letting everyone feel it. $15,000. For what? For speaking, for pushing back, for doing my job. The air crackled. This wasn't the end of his sentence. It was the start of something else. He didn't know it yet, but I felt it. A shift in the pressure. The beginning of the break. Rewind 60 seconds. Maybe 90. The moment just before the gavel fell metaphorically on my head. I was standing at the podium, presenting Exhibit G. Photographs, ugly ones, showing the cracked foundations, the water damage deliberately hidden behind new drywall. Clear evidence of negligence, of fraud, really. My voice was calm, measured, pointing out the timestamp on the inspection report, cross-referencing it with the contractor's invoices. As you can see, Your Honor, the repairs listed on this invoice dated May 1st could not possibly address the structural issues identified in the independent assessment from April 28th. Simple facts, clearly laid out. Opposing counsel objected. Of course they did. Relevance, Your Honor, counsel is leading the witness, well, the documents. He always fumbled his objections. Albright waved him off. Not because the objection was bad, but because he had his own angle. He leaned forward, into the microphone. That folksy charm turned up just a notch too high. Ms. Evans, he began, a smile playing on his lips. While your dedication is admirable, the pause just long enough to land like a small insult. Don't you think you're seeing zebras where there are only horses? A folksy saying, meant to dismiss, to patronize. A few chuckles from the back row. People who still thought he was just being avuncular. I didn't smile back. Your Honor, my voice remained steady. With all due respect, these aren't zebras. I tapped the photograph. These are cracks wide enough to see daylight through. The damage is documented, witnessed, and directly contradicts the seller's disclosure. I tried to continue, to connect it back to the timeline. The timeline shows a clear attempt to conceal. He cut me off, sharply. Ms. Evans. The smile was gone now, replaced by impatience. The court understands concealment. What the court questions is your insistence on painting this as some grand conspiracy rather than simple oversight. Simple oversight. 15 families displaced. Life savings gone. Because of simple oversight. Your Honor, I started again, keeping my voice level, fighting the heat rising in my chest. The evidence doesn't suggest oversight. It suggests a deliberate pattern. That's enough, Ms. Evans. His voice was hard now. Final. You've made your point repeatedly. He looked away, dismissed me, turned to opposing counsel. Do you have anything further on this exhibit, Mr. Henderson? As if I hadn't been speaking. As if the evidence was irrelevant. It was the tone, the casual disregard, the implication that my thoroughness was an annoyance, that I was the problem, not the fraud, not the ruined lives. My persistence, that was the crime here. And that's when I spoke again. Quietly, but clearly, into the charged air. Your Honor, refusing to see the pattern doesn't make it disappear. He snapped his head back toward me, his face darkening. Counselor, the word was clipped, a warning. But I held his gaze. Didn't waver. It wasn't loud. It wasn't disrespectful. It was just the truth. And that's what he couldn't handle. The truth, delivered plainly, without apology. His hand reached for the gavel, his knuckles white. Ms. Evans, he said, his voice tight with anger he was trying to mask as judicial authority. I warned you about your tone. He looked around the room again, seeking validation, finding only watchful eyes. The amusement was gone now, replaced by anticipation. This court, he declared, his voice rising slightly, will maintain decorum. He looked back at me. The decision made. The punishment decided. And therefore, Ms. Evans, this court finds you in contempt, a fine of $15,000. The hammer blow, intended to crush, to silence, to win. This wasn't the first time. Not with Albright. Not in this system. The microaggressions started weeks ago. In chambers. During preliminary motions. Small things. Easily deniable. Calling me young lady when I presented a complex argument. Interrupting my points mid-sentence, then summarizing them inaccurately. So what you're trying to say is, followed by a watered-down version that missed the entire legal edge. Opposing counsel, older white male, got learned counsel. Got uninterrupted time. Got knowing nods from the bench. I got patience. Or the performance of it. Thinly veiled condescension. In open court, it was subtler. At first, he'd misstate the names from my briefs. Not majorly. Just enough to sow confusion. Enough to make me constantly correct him. Making me look disruptive. Actually, Your Honor, the witness's name is Peterson, not Peters. Yes, yes, whatever, a dismissive wave. He'd praise my passion. Never my intellect, never my preparation. Ms. Evans certainly feels strongly about this, delivered with a wry smile to the jury box. Undermining my credibility with faint praise. It chips away at you. That constant, low-level resistance. Like walking against a strong wind. You have to brace yourself. Conserve energy. Choose your battles. I remembered Professor Davies, law school, contracts final review. I'd found a flaw in his hypothetical, a loophole based on a recent appellate ruling he hadn't incorporated. I raised my hand, pointed it out respectfully. He listened, smiled tightly. Miss Hayes, he'd used my maiden name then. While your enthusiasm for obscure rulings is noted, he'd said to the whole lecture hall. Perhaps focus on mastering the basics before you try to rewrite the curriculum. Laughter then too. Dismissal. The same feeling. Being patted on the head while presenting a razor-sharp point. Being told your diligence is cute, but ultimately irrelevant to the real work happening. The work men were doing. Albright was Davies in a robe. With more power. The power to fine. The power to rule. The power to shape the narrative within these four walls. I breathed slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Tried to ground myself. Focus on the facts. The law. My client. But the injustice simmered. Not just the injustice in the case, but the injustice of the process itself. The way the playing field was tilted. Subtly. Pervasively. And how calling it out. That was the real transgression. He held the power, and he wielded it. Not like a scale, like a shield, and sometimes like a weapon. $15,000. Aimed right at my resolve. I tried shifting tactics, appealing to his stated commitment to the law, to precedent, during arguments on a motion to exclude key testimony. Opposing counsel cited a case from the 1980s, obscure, barely relevant. Albright leaned forward, nodding intently. Interesting point, Mr. Henderson, very well reasoned. My turn came. I stood up, held up a copy of a Supreme Court ruling from 2 years ago. Directly on point, contradicting Henderson's argument completely. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and steady. With respect to opposing counsel's citation, the controlling precedent is Smith v. Allied Corp., decided just last term. I placed it on the podium, highlighted the relevant passage. Page 23 clearly states that testimony regarding subsequent remedial measures is admissible when offered for another purpose, such as proving ownership or control, which is precisely what we are doing here. I looked at Albright. Expected acknowledgement. Engagement with the law. Instead, he waved a dismissive hand. Didn't even look at the ruling. Ms. Evans, he sighed like a weary parent. We're not here for a law school lecture on the intricacies of evidence. He actually said that. In open court, dismissing a controlling Supreme Court precedent as a law school lecture. The court is well aware of Smith v. Allied Corp., he lied, his eyes flicking away. But in this context, he leaned on the word, as if this courtroom operated under its own special rules. The potential for prejudice substantially outweighs the probative value. Motion granted. The testimony is excluded. Just like that, my key witness, gutted, based on nothing but his whim. His preference for Henderson's argument. Or perhaps his preference for Henderson. Silence. A different kind of silence this time. Not shock. Something heavier. The weight of blatant unfairness. I paused. A long pause. Letting the ruling hang there. Letting the implications sink in. For my client. For the case. For the very idea of justice in this room. I didn't argue further. Didn't protest. What was the point? He wasn't listening to the law. He was listening to his own internal biases. So I just stood there, silent, holding his gaze. My stillness became a statement. My lack of reaction, a reaction in itself. The audience felt it. The slight shuffling stopped. The coughing ceased. Everyone watched him. Watched me, sensing the power dynamic shifting. Not through words, but through the tension in the silence. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Cleared his throat. Anything further, Ms. Evans? He asked, a slight edge to his voice now. Trying to regain control. To force me back into the rhythm of the proceedings. I took a breath. "No, Your Honor," I said quietly, and sat down. But the silence lingered. The challenge hadn't been spoken, but it had been made, and he felt it. The air was different now. The polite facade had cracked. The game was changing. The breaking point arrived disguised as a procedural ruling. Exhibit H, an internal memo from the defendant's company. Unearthed after months of digging. A smoking gun. It detailed concerns about the very foundation, issues they later claimed were minor. Dated before the sale to my clients. Proving knowledge, intent. I moved to admit it. Laid the foundation carefully. Authenticated the document through deposition testimony. Clear chain of custody. Textbook admissibility. Opposing counsel objected, weakly. Hearsay, Your Honor, lack of foundation. Standard stuff, easily rebutted. I stood ready to respond. But Albright didn't look at me. He looked at the memo, then at Henderson, then back at the memo. A flicker of something, annoyance, panic. "The objection is sustained," he said quickly, too quickly. "This document lacks sufficient authentication under Rule 901. I froze. Rule 901. I just spent 10 minutes authenticating it through their own witness's deposition. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice tightly controlled. "May I remind the court that authenticity was stipulated by defendant's own CFO, Mr. Davies, during his deposition on June 14th, page 87, lines 10 through 25. I had the transcript ready, tabbed and highlighted. Albright waved it away, again. "Depositions are not conclusive, Ms. Evans. The court requires stricter proof for admission at trial." Stricter proof, what? He hadn't applied this stricter proof standard when Henderson admitted his documents. Exhibit D, an email chain, admitted with barely a question. The unfairness was staggering, blatant. This wasn't just bias anymore. This was active obstruction. My voice when I spoke was low, each word precise. Fighting to keep the tremor out. "Your Honor, with respect." The respect felt like sandpaper in my mouth. That standard wasn't applied to Exhibit D, presented by opposing counsel, just yesterday. I saw Henderson flinch slightly. He knew it was true. The courtroom was utterly silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Albright's face hardened. The mask of geniality dissolved completely, replaced by cold fury. He leaned forward, his voice dangerously soft. "Are you questioning my ruling, Ms. Evans?" The implicit threat hung in the air. "Are you accusing me of bias? Are you challenging my authority?" Yes, and yes, but I didn't say that. Not yet. I held his gaze. Let the silence answer for me. The tension was unbearable. Thick enough to choke on. The audience wasn't breathing. They knew this was it. The moment everything had been building towards. The mask was off. The gloves were coming off. He saw the defiance in my stillness, in my refusal to back down. His eyes narrowed. He was losing control. Of the courtroom. Of the narrative. Of me. And he knew it. That's when he reached for the ultimate weapon. Not law, not reason. Pure power. Judge Albright leaned into the microphone. His voice amplified, filling the tense silence. "Your tone, Ms. Evans," he declared, trying to project authority he no longer fully commanded, "is bordering on insubordinate." He scanned the courtroom. A practiced move. Seeking allies in the gallery. But the faces watching him were different now. No longer amused or passively accepting. They were rapt, waiting. Seeing the emperor had no clothes. Or at least that his robes were askew. He didn't find the support he expected. His gaze snapped back to me, harder now. I have given you latitude, counsel, he continued, the words clipped. Considerable latitude. As if his biased rulings were acts of generosity. But this pattern, he paused for dramatic effect. Oh, this pattern of disrespect. He let the accusation hang there. Disrespect. Because I presented evidence. Because I cited the law. Because I pointed out his inconsistency. It cannot stand. He looked directly at me. His eyes cold. This court finds you in contempt, Ms. Evans. He said it again, savoring the words. The exercise of power. A fine of $15,000. He leaned back slightly. A posture of finality. Of dominance asserted. Perhaps, he added, unable to resist twisting the knife. Perhaps that will clarify the lines of authority in my courtroom. My courtroom. Possessive, territorial. As if justice was his personal property. To be dispensed or withheld at his pleasure. He expected me to crumble. To protest loudly. To argue. To cry. To give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. He waited. The entire courtroom waited. Holding its breath. I didn't break. I didn't even bend. My spine felt like steel. My breathing remained slow, even. Deliberate. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the anger beneath the judicial mask. Saw the insecurity driving the aggression. Saw the fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing control. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. It felt eternal. The focus of the entire room narrowed to the space between the bench and my podium. A single mote of dust drifted through a sunbeam. Someone in the gallery coughed nervously, instantly suppressed. Then my voice. Quiet, but it sliced through the tension like a scalpel. Your Honors. Just 2 words. Polite. Procedural. But the way I said them. The weight behind them. It stopped him cold. He'd started to turn away to signal the end. He turned back reluctantly. Another pause. I let it sit there. Let him feel the eyes of the room on him. Then the rest. Still quiet, still measured. Each word chosen, placed. The line you're drawing. My eyes locked onto his, unwavering. It isn't authority. A beat of silence. Perfectly timed. Long enough for the implication to land. It's bias. A collective gasp swept the gallery. Sharp audible. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A pen clattered to the floor again, louder this time. It felt like a physical blow had landed in the room. The truth spoken plainly. Stripped bare of euphemism. Of deference. Just the raw, unvarnished fact. Bias. Judge Albright's face went from pale to crimson. In seconds. A tide of fury washing over him. His mouth opened, closed. He sputtered. For the first time, truly losing his composure. He grabbed the gavel. Banged it hard. Once, twice. The sound cracked through the charged air. Order, he yelled, his voice strained, too loud. Order in this courtroom. But I wasn't finished. My voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. The quiet precision was its own power. This fine, I continued, my gaze relentless, isn't about contempt. Each word a hammer blow. Soft but devastating. It's about control. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes before he masked it. He knew it was true. You needed to shut me up. A slight gesture towards the excluded memo, towards the stack of evidence he'd ignored. Because the facts, Pause. Inconvenience the narrative you prefer. The air crackled. This was it. The core of it all. His narrative, his control, threatened by facts, by truth, by me. And then the final sentence, delivered with the same quiet intensity. The words that would echo far beyond these walls. $15,000. I held his furious, trapped gaze. Is the price you put on silencing truth in your courtroom. Mic drop. Absolute stunned silence. For a heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. The world seemed to stop. Then, from the back of the gallery, a single clap. Loud, defiant. Another joined in. Then another. Slowly at first, hesitantly. A ripple spreading through the stunned crowd. Gaining momentum. Becoming a wave. Applause. Not polite applause. Raw, spontaneous, defiant applause. For the truth spoken. For the power challenged. For the mask ripped away. It rolled through the courtroom, washing over the bench. Judge Albright was on his feet now. Gavel banging repeatedly, frantically. Order, order, I demand order. His voice cracking, drowned out. He looked panicked, lost. The authority he clung to, gone. Evaporated in the face of quiet truth and public acclamation. I didn't smile. Didn't acknowledge the applause. That wasn't the point. I calmly, slowly, gathered my papers. My hands perfectly steady. Squared the edges, placed them in my briefcase. Snapped it shut. The click was audible even over the din. I looked at Judge Albright one last time. His face contorted with rage and helplessness. Met his gaze. Held it. My expression wasn't triumphant. It wasn't smug. It was acknowledgement. Of his failure. Of the exposure. Of the truth laid bare. A quiet, uncomfortable respect wasn't the right word. It was the quiet, uncomfortable consequence hanging in the air. He had wielded his power, and it had shattered in his hands. The courtroom doors burst open. Not literally, but the energy shift was that palpable. Outside, in the marble hallway, it had already begun. Someone must have been live tweeting or recording audio. My phone, tucked away in my bag on vibrate, started buzzing. A low, insistent hum against my hip. Then another buzz, another. A cascade. As I walked out composed, head held high, nodding briefly to my client who looked dazed but resolute, the hallway wasn't empty. A small knot of reporters materialized. How did they get here so fast? Microphones extended, flashing cameras I hadn't expected. Ms. Evans, what happened in there? Is it true Judge Albright fined you $15,000? Did you accuse him of bias? The questions came fast, overlapping. I stopped, took a breath. Faced them calmly. No anger in my voice, just clarity. There was a procedural ruling, I stated evenly. And a finding of contempt. I didn't need to embellish, didn't need to fight. The truth was out. The court record, I added, my voice carrying just enough. It speaks for itself. A reporter pushed forward, but the accusation of bias, the fine. We presented the facts of our case, I replied, holding her gaze briefly. We will continue to present the facts. The people affected by this deserve justice based on evidence, not judicial preference. I gave a slight nod, excuse me, and walked through them. The buzzing in my bag intensified. A quick glance down showed notifications exploding. Twitter news alerts, texts. Judge Albright. Courtroom clapback. Jasmine Evans. Silencing truth. 15K fine. It was already a hashtag storm. Someone held up a phone as I passed. playing a tinny, distorted audio clip. A price you put on silencing truth in your courtroom, followed by the unmistakable sound of applause erupting. My words echoing already. Out here in the world, beyond the wood-paneled walls where Albright thought he reigned supreme. Inside, I heard later, chaos continued briefly. Albright, red-faced and shaking, abruptly adjourned court for the day, shouting something about clearing the gallery, threatening further contempt charges. But the power had definitively left him. He retreated to chambers, slammed the door. Opposing counsel, Henderson, apparently looked pale and deeply uncomfortable. Caught in the blast radius, the carefully constructed facade of polite legal battle, obliterated, replaced by the raw exposure of bias and the startling sound of public judgment rendered instantly. The air outside the courthouse buzzed, not just my phone. The energy was electric. Something had broken open. Something significant. And it was only just beginning. The next morning, it was everywhere. Not just legal blogs or local news. Everywhere. My face, a still captured from some blurry courtroom feed, was on the front page of online news sites. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, even though their angle was different. Activist lawyer disrupts courtroom versus judge accused of bias after imposing hefty fine. Two sides of the same coin, both missing the core. It wasn't disruption, it was exposure. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a statement of fact finally voiced. My phone hadn't stopped. Emails poured in, support, hate mail, interview requests. Social media was a wildfire. TikToks popped up overnight, young people lip-syncing the audio clip. $15,000 is the price you put on silencing truth. Some did dramatic reenactments. Some used it as a sound bed for their own stories of being silenced. Bias in the courtroom trended globally. Truth to power. Jasmine Evans solidified. Sometimes hero lawyer, sometimes disrespectful lawyer. The polarization was instant, fierce. X, formerly Twitter, was a battlefield. Blue-check journalists debated courtroom decorum versus judicial temperament. Law professors dissected the contempt ruling, the potential appeals, the ethical implications for Albright. Ordinary people weighed in with fury and passion. She spoke for all of us who have been shut down by powerful men. Judges demand respect. She crossed a line. The fine was justified. He wasn't fining her for contempt. He was fining her for winning. Finally, someone called it out. Activist judges are one thing, activist lawyers are another. Throw the book at her. The think pieces started landing. Op-eds about systemic bias in the justice system. About the specific challenges faced by women, especially women of color, in positions of authority or challenge. About the power of quiet defiance. Podcasts dropped emergency episodes. Legal analysts parsed the transcript, minute by minute. Political commentators framed it within broader culture wars. Morning shows played the clip, followed by panels of talking heads offering instant, often shallow, analysis. One host, trying to be empathetic, called it a fiery outburst. No, it wasn't fiery, it wasn't an outburst. It was cold, precise, controlled. That's what they didn't get. The power wasn't in the volume, it was in the truth, delivered surgically. The fine itself, almost irrelevant now. My firm paid it immediately, calling it an investment in judicial transparency. The real impact wasn't the money. It was the crack in the foundation. The ripple effect. The conversation forced into the open. Judge Albright issued a statement through a court spokesperson, regretting the escalation, but standing by the contempt finding, citing the need for order and respect for the bench. Too little, too late. The narrative was out of his control. Utterly. The final image wasn't of him banging his gavel. It was the image they kept showing. Me standing at the podium, calm, looking directly ahead. The quiet before the storm. Or rather, the quiet of the storm. The silent assertion that reverberated louder than any shout. The sound of truth landing in an echo chamber and shattering the glass. No victory lap, no celebration. Just the quiet, heavy resonance. The work continued. But something had irrevocably changed. Not just in that courtroom, but out here, in the humming, buzzing, watching world. The price had been named, and now everyone was listening.